etc. And therefore, that's what I'll be doing. And it doesn't make much of a difference to the question or to the topic that you have assigned to me. And before I start, this presentation will have this outline, that is introductory remark is that I'm extremely happy to be joining this workshop, and thanks to Abhijit, who has reached out to me. And then the first part of obviously would be caste dynamics in India, its evolution, and the caste dynamics is not restricted to the caste itself in India, but there have been religious influences over time. And then over time, one of the things that has happened because of the given caste structure, there is caste-based inequalities that are pervasive, and then the second part that was added to or has been added to this is urbanization, because urbanization in itself is a very interesting phenomena, and its history and significance I will very briefly take a look into, and then look at the growth of cities, especially large cities, and how they have evolved, especially over the last couple of hundred of years, and then urbanization and social group intersectionality, and that's where the talk is intended to focus on. And finally, I will have some concluding observation. Evolution of hierarchical society along the caste axis. This is typical of Indian subcontinent, or South Asia as it is called. Okay, this is a society that is very old civilization, and it evolved over time with a particular religion denomination, and that is Hindu. And there is a lot that has been written, talked about. There are all kind of literature that is available, from religious literature to how the division came about, mythologically or otherwise, and subsequent discourse and discussion around and on the caste and its consequences, and mostly until very recently, actually, this the hierarchical structure of the society has been discussed from the point of view of social, political consequences and its implications. This has also got into economic analysis, and in a big way in recent decades, where the socio-religious structure affects several or most of the development outcomes, and that is where I basically be focusing on, and that's where I will take you to. What has been its consequences? So we all know that in Hindu Varna system divided the society into four clearly defined Varnas, or which later on somebody might just ask, well, that is not exactly how the caste is defined, but broadly these four Varnas then convert into different caste groups, where you have Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudras. But that is how it has been historically defined, historically known, and in that context, that's the way it is discussed. In a modern sense, or in much more contemporary view of the caste, is more to do with how it has been identified within the Indian constitution or Indian political setup. And that brings us to the definition of certain caste groups which are known as scheduled castes, which from the original classification more or less correspond to what is known as Sudras from the Hindu Varna system. The other group that doesn't get, but possibly would get classified, would have got classified or gets classified into this group, is scheduled tribe, but they have been kept separate from the Sudras, which the Indian Constitution defines it as scheduled tribe and scheduled caste. So scheduled tribes are the ones who have very, their existence has been one, their concentration of population is in a different pockets, and they have been living in mostly inaccessible areas. And for that, there is a schedule which mentions which are the population groups that would be classified as scheduled tribes in different parts of India and Indian states. So that is scheduled tribe. And then we have scheduled caste, which is again there is a schedule that puts different castes into that, which would be classified as scheduled caste. And then there are other population groups which of late has been very clearly identified as other backward classes. These are not castes, but these are backward classes. And the Brahmin, Kshatriyas, and several other groups have been clubbed together to define who is not ST, not SC, and not OBC. That is, they are not other backward classes, they are not scheduled caste, they are not scheduled tribe. So it's a basically residual if all three gets classified in a clearly identifiable way. So that is the kind of structure that is there, rather than debating about this historical reasons and etc. etc. I don't want to get into that detail because it's very well known to all of us. I am more interested, and I would be more interested to get into the discussion of this kind of caste structure on the what are its consequences. And before I get into the consequences, I want to show you something. This table is visible to all of you? Hello?
Yeah, it is.
This table you can see? All of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can see.
Now, what I just said, it's essentially a Hindu society, or the religion's denomination as Hindu, and the population groups, if you look at the last column, so entire Indian population would get classified, as I just told you. There is scheduled tribe, there is scheduled caste, there are other backward classes, and anybody else who is not classified any of the three above gets classified as others. And the last column gives you their estimated distribution as per the survey data, sample survey data collected by the Government of India, which puts ST is about 9%, SC is about 19%, OBC is about 44%, and all others, remaining ones, at 28%. That is the structure of Indian population per se. And as you can see, or as we know, the religious influences came both from within, or different religious denominations originated or came from within, like we have Buddhism and Jainism, and they are out, and Sikhism. The outside two important religious influences were Muslims and Christians. And once these two influences came, and Sikhs, what we find is that the caste structure, in fact, at least Muslims and Christians, or Islam and Christianity, they do not distinguish on the basis of caste. However, the Indian population, despite the fact that these two religions have different approach to looking at the population, or population as a single or homogeneous entity, in Indian context, it turns out that, well, even though there are Muslims, they are Muslims, but somehow or the other, for whatever reason that can be debated, and that can be discussed, is that the basic population structure basically got influenced by the Muslim without a change in the caste denomination in this case. So there are, we are looking at a population of to the tune of about 140 crores or 1400 million, and even 0.1% would be some lakhs of persons that we would be looking at. Maybe 1.4 million would be ST Muslims. Similarly, close to 2.5 to 3 million would be SCs who identify themselves as Muslims, but they also identify themselves as SC. And other backward classes among the Muslims are 6.9%, and others are 6.4%. So the last row, which is highlighted in yellow, tells you the religious distribution or distribution of Indian population by religion as it was estimated for 2011-12. The point that I want to make here is that, well, we had a society which traditionally evolved around a social structure, and in the modern interpretation of modern classification of that results in ST, SC, OBC, and others, the religious influences could not make any dent or significant dent, I won't say any dent, a significant dent on the social structure of the Indian population. And that's why in all the columns, there are about, out of the total Hindus or total Hindu population, there is close to 8% are STs, about 17.5% are scheduled caste, 36, more than 36% are OBCs, and close to 20% are others. In case of Muslims, the distribution is in front of you. In case of Christians, there are more STs, less SCs, less OBCs, and very less others. And their total share in the total population is just about 2.2%. Sikh is another indigenous or influence or religious denomination coming from within India, and their total share is about 0.6%, or SCs out of the total 1.6, and OBCs are very small proportion, 0.2%, and others are 0.8%. So they account for 1.6% of the total Indian population. And other religious minorities has Buddhists, the Parsis, Jains, etc., and that total accounts for 1.0, just about 1%, which adds up to 100%. So what we get from here is that when we talk about the caste, the religious denomination cannot be ignored or cannot be whisked away. And therefore, all the dynamics or anything that happens among the caste groups is also on the lines of socio-religious denomination. It's not only social or the caste structure that we are familiar with, but it also the corresponding religious influences, and therefore the different caste groups. So this matrix very clearly lays out, or it puts in front of us the broadly defined the population structure of India. And that too, and this is a picture that emerges sometimes in 2011-12, which is estimated, as I told you, based on the government collected national sample survey data. What are its consequences is something that is the questions that we have to essentially start looking at, and then what I would need to clarify, or I want to essentially say, given this kind of population structure and the kind of dynamics that we want to discuss, what are the questions that essentially get involved or are part of this kind of population structure that is of interest, especially in the urban setting? So this is the first part. And as of now, you might say the moment I start talking about the urban structure and urban areas, This is a slightly different way of doing the same thing, and here I have done the rural-urban division of the population groups, except that it's not in that kind of detail as the previous slide, but this detail gives you, in case of urban areas, there are more OBCs and others that they count for close to 82%, and there are very small proportion of them live in urban areas, that's 3.5%, and just about under 15% of SCs out of the total 19%. In the total, if they are 19%, in urban areas, their share is much less than 19%. Hindu-Muslim division is, again, straightforward, but if we look at the population distribution between rural and urban of Muslims, more of them are they live in urban areas, that is about 17%, and just over 12% are in the rural areas. So this is the rural-urban division. And this, especially the column that is identified as urban, plays a very important role, and that's where I will be coming to. Now, the second part of the talk is urbanization and size of settlement. So all of us are familiar with the term urban or towns or cities. All of them together are called. Can you just hold on for a second?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is last few days of the year, and there are certain things that are completed for the students because they have to submit their dissertation by 31st of December. Sorry for the interruption. Now, urban settlements in the historical context is to be seen, and if we start looking at the history of urbanization or history of our population settlement in much more concentration, with much more concentration, and its history we can trace back up to 4,000 years. There are a couple of very interesting readings done by somebody by the name Chandler, Tertius Chandler. He has two monographs. One is on the history of urbanization for the last 3,000 years, and the other one is urbanization history for the last 4,000 years. And what essentially urban settlements say, and that is where the question of urban settlement and what uses it has and why the population tends to concentrate in space has been also addressed to and dealt with by Aristotle and Plato. So what they have said is that this kind of population concentration, which is Sahara city, town, whatever you call it, is required or was required historically for good governance. And those of you who have had chance to visit some of the cities, old cities, and therefore there is this distinction between walled city and its newer avatar or newer version, where the walled cities, where the population concentration used to be there historically, are far more densely populated and dense. There is a dense concentration of structures and buildings and population compared to the more recent version of the urban settlement. So the concentration of population existed for a long time, for centuries, at least the known history or the recorded history that which has been written upon is by Tertius Chandler, which says that the urban cities or urban settlements existed. But our purpose here, my aim here is not to just remain in the historical context or and deal with the history, but we also need to look at what happened to the modern urban settlement and one question that is it that the urban settlements continue to be the seat of power and good governance, or there has been change in the role of these settlements? And that's the question that gets answered by understanding that, well, the population settlement has undergone a drastic change over the last 200 years or so. And this change has happened because of the Industrial Revolution. Like the good governance required population concentration and settlement of population is in a relatively smaller space, the industrialization required concentration of workers or settlement of workers in a relatively smaller space. And that is when the process of urbanization or urban settlement has been looked much more scientifically and much more carefully. And the way it works out is that, in fact, and it's a slightly technical term, which if somebody is interested to get a little more detail, you can ask me now or along at the end of the talk, is essentially the substitution of capital and labor for land. That is, the economic activities that were happening in the pre-urban, pre-industrial revolution era were mostly the primary sector activities. However, post-industrial revolution, the economic activities got transformed into non-primary sector, or more and more non-primary sector. That requires the space concentrates or compresses, and more capital and labor is used in a relatively smaller space. And that's where the urban settlement started increasing and expanding. And now we have urban settlements like until about 1971, Calcutta used to be one of the largest cities in India, and perhaps maybe third or fourth largest in the world. But now some of the largest cities in the world are in India, and therefore, and these are is not only the particular city, but the settlements around it, like for example, Bombay, and therefore, in fact, there's a new concept that has come up. It's known as metropolitan area. So these are the metropolis, or metropolitan area, which are sprawling urban settlements with a population to the tune of 20 million or more in some cases. For example, Bombay has about 20 million population of its own, and similarly Delhi or Calcutta or other metropolitan cities in India are coming up. And one can look or just try to think of the largest cities in the world, and you'll find that 4 or 5 of Indian cities would rank among the top 10 cities in the world in terms of the sheer population. Now, these two parts, one is about the socio-religious characteristics of a population, that is Indian population, and the second one is the population settlement, especially in the urban areas, or especially the urban population settlement. Are these two disjoint phenomena, or is there an interaction or intersectionality or intersection between the two? And that's precisely what I have been asked to speak on, that what happens, what is the dynamics when this size of the population settlement known as urban happens, and how does the caste or religion or intersectionality of the two turns out, and what is it that we should be looking at when we are looking at the socio-religious dynamics of population settlements. In case of rural areas, it has been very well known that the hierarchical population structure resulted in various kind of undesirable development outcomes. when I say development outcomes which are undesirable, is that there were certain population groups which turned out to be suffering with multiple deprivations that included poverty, hunger, malnutrition, little or no education, etc., etc. And it is that kind of population that started resettling in the modern setup or modern urban settlements, and how does they fare on different development outcomes. I have all those numbers, but I don't want to bore you with the details, and also I'm keeping an eye on the watch, which is ticking pretty fast right next to me. So now the share of the urban population in India, which is available from different censuses, is from 1901 till 2011 is given here. And way back in more than 120 years ago, we had just about under 11% population, which was 11% actually, which was urban, or the population was has settled in urban areas. And it was a mix of the two, the governance as well as some economic activity, because Britishers in India did indulge in some rudimentary industrialization. So industrial revolution that took place in Britain and spread in the rest of the Europe and other parts of the world, in India it did spread, but in a controlled, or in a way it was influenced by the British policies, and therefore it never had, I mean, industrial revolution or effect of industrial revolution. If it actually has been on India, this happened in a very different way than perhaps the rest of the Europe or the northern hemisphere per se. And as you can see, the population, urban population or share of urban population in Indian total population kept rising steadily, and in 2011 it stands at 31% of the total population, and it is predicted to go up to about over 50% within the next couple of decades. Now, clearly, the socio-religious structure of the population will have a very different dynamics in urban setup than it has in the rural setup, as far as the development outcomes are concerned, which I just mentioned. Now, when we say urban, it comprises of population settlements of different sizes. And I've tried to, and the breakup that is given here, or the sort of cutoff points that are given for definition of different size of town. In fact, in census, you'll find the Census of India gives these population settlement defined by different population settlement cutoffs. But the data that I have used for most of my work is based on the sample survey, and it gives data other than the census years. So small towns are the ones which have population settlement up to 50,000 only, and 50,000 to 2 lakhs are referred to as medium towns in this definition, although census defines medium and small and large somewhat differently. Large towns are the ones which have population of 2 lakhs or more, but less than 10 lakhs. And there were cities which had more than 10 lakh population, and their respective share in the total urban population is on the columns in 1983, 93, 94. That's basically decadal variation or decadal change one can see. So what we get from here is that it's a smaller towns, their share is declining. It's not, but their number is not declining. It's just their share is declining because the medium, large, and extra large towns are having attracting more and more population, or more and more population settlement. So that's what it gives you. And one of the things to look at it would be the inequality that different settlement sizes have. Just rather than getting sort of bored looking at the numbers that are there in millions or lakhs, what you could just look at the last row, the ratio of income of top 5% or average income of top 5% divided by the average income of bottom 10% of the population. And in the rural areas, what we find is that the ratio is well over 360. What it tells us is that rural areas, given the population structure that I have talked about, turned out to be one of the most unequal society or unequal economic gains that were occurring to the populations that are the population that was living in urban areas. This is in rural areas, and this is a total rural, that's total India rural. Total India urban, on the other hand, is much less unequal. It's the difference between top 5% and bottom 10% is, the ratio is just under 45. That is, the top 5% earn, or their average income is about more than 44 times than the average incomes of bottom 10%. And if we look at how the population settlement sizes, small, medium, large, and extra large. In this case, small is less than 50,000, medium is 50,000, 2 lakhs, large is 2 lakhs to 10 lakhs, and extra large is 32 lakhs. This keeps declining. That is, largest, if we are dealing with the largest city sizes, the difference between bottom 10% and top 5% in terms of the ratio of their income is about 32 times only. Now, what implication it has for the dynamics of the caste and religious dynamics if we are start looking at only on the extra large towns? The dynamics that are what it present is that irrespective of, I'm going to be looking at the population and occupation structure, or I'm going to show you the population and occupation structure by social groups, that is ST, SC, OBC, and others in subsequent slides. But from this particular slide or this particular table, what it tells us is that larger the concentration of population as defined as definition of urban would entail, or as it implies, is that larger the settlement, lower is going to be the earning inequalities. That is one of the key messages that comes out of here. Put differently, the inequalities that were all pervasive, which have been tied up to or have been linked to to rural areas in terms of population settlement and the population structure that was more of based on Hindu Varna system, has been highly unequal, continues to be highly unequal, even as late as in recent last one decade, for which we could find the information or gather the information. To the large population settlement, where this kind of inequality gets mitigated to a large extent from 360 times to just 32 times, is a huge gain as far as the as far as the population group inequalities are concerned. And the other way of looking at the same thing is when we start looking at the inequalities. This is slightly technical because there is a single number that is calculated based on what we call the income inequality, or vertical inequality, as sometimes it's referred to, and as can be very clearly seen, the rural is most unequal at 0.52, and smaller, larger cities have least inequality, that is 0.46. In between large, small, and medium have slightly higher inequality compared to rural even, but total urban inequality compared to rural is significantly lower, and so is the inequality in the urban areas. I'll skip this in order to keep with time. And the outcomes, as I told you, one of the most important outcomes that has been the part of any development discourse world over is poverty. And as you can see, the poverty levels are the smallest in case of largest cities, whether it is in 2004, 5, or 2011 and 12, for which the data has been used here. Whereas in urban poverty in general is much lower compared to the rural, and its decline also has been much more faster. That is, poverty has declined in urban areas much faster than in the rural areas. And it will have its consequences on the population dynamics that we are going to be looking at. This particular slide, which is the last slide that I'm going to be showing, our last set of numbers that I'm going to be sharing with you all, is population distribution in the small, medium, large, and metros. It is the out of all the STs that are that live in the urban areas, most of them, close to more than 43%, are in smaller towns. In case of SCs, more than 35% are in smaller towns. In case of OBCs, 34.2% are in smaller towns, and others 44%. But in metros, the population distribution of ST, SC, OBC, and others, and metros has been defined earlier at a million plus cities. In this definition, in this particular tabulation, it's 15 lakh plus is metros, because over time the definitions from the data collection agencies have been changed, and I've followed that. Now, on the right-hand side panel, when we are looking at the large cities and metros separately, the legend in the top row in large cities are here 3 lakhs to 15 lakhs or less than 15 lakhs. Here, the main source of income is of the household, and how does the household earn their living or earn their income is from self-employment, regular wage and salary, casual labor, and mixed source of income. Mixed income source, MIX is mixed source of income. And as one can see, in case of metros, the STs and SCs have fairly high proportion of them working as casual labor. A quarter of STs and close to a quarter of SCs, the total SCs who are working, and the households which are there, there's the household level information, they have their main source of income as a casual labor. Now, and the least is in case of others, where the casual labor are just about 11%. So their main source of income, which is about 71% of the household, earn their living from self-employment or regular wage and salary. In case of ST and SC, both, this number is somewhat different. And where it shows is either in the casual labor or in the mixed source of income. That is, these are the households that have income, more than 2 income sources, which accounts for their total income. So what does it convey about the population dynamics. And if I try to summarize what I have tried to say, is that the evolution of Hindu society or Indian society along the caste lines involved certain inherent or hierarchical structure and inequalities along with it, because the caste, the occupations were somewhat tied with different castes. That resulted in the kind of inequality that we have seen in the rural areas is still pervasive and present, which is very, very high by any standard. However, the moment we get into this urban settlement and cities, and more so in case of largest possible cities, that is the population with the population settlement of 15 lakhs and above, one, we see that the structure of the occupation, and broadly the self-employment can be anything from holding a small, having a small shop, to a consultant with a white collar, very high training. But in what it shows is, what it says here is that, well, SCs, especially where the caste, and they had been one of the most deprived groups as a caste group in India, and if their share is about 19-20% today, it's quite encouraging to see that there is a drastic change in the way they earn their living in the metros. Now, does it have, because that kind of cost structure had very many other implications, social implications. Has it changed, or is it changing the implication of the social implications? The answer, probably somebody who has done this kind of analysis would come up with, yes, there are still traces of those kind of social division and social stratification, like untouchability, etc. But as we move along in the size of the population settlement, there are several studies, some of my colleagues have been doing it, and they also come up with the same thing, that, well, there is change in the way people have started looking at these social relations, and issues like untouchability, etc., are more and more getting marginalized. So, in sum, the resettlement of population in urban areas in general and in metropolitan cities in particular implies has some very, very important social consequences besides the occupational and income earning consequences. Income earning consequences you can see straightway. Social consequences may not appear or may not be exactly the same way as one can observe in the rural areas even today. But this is certainly a direction that is encouraging, is where I will stop. And I have taken about 40 minutes of your time. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you, Abhijit, for invitation once again.
Thank you so much, sir. This was really a very important discussion, since I'm primarily a student of literature, and there are many students present here who are primarily students of literature or history. We do not very often research on this kind of data, and we do not have sometimes a methodological training to analyze this kind of data. So this was really important for all of us who want to do a kind of transdisciplinary research regarding caste dynamics in urban India. I thank you once again for this wonderful presentation. The floor is open, so we can have a brief discussion and interactive session with you. The participants who are eager to ask questions to Professor Dubey, you can ask. You can actually unmute yourself and ask a question. Otherwise, you can also write your question down in the chat box. I think there is no other question right now, but I would request you, sir, if you want to provide any kind of study material, then you can just mail me. I can circulate that in that WhatsApp group of these participants. Uh, there is a question for you, sir, for in the chat box.
Yeah, you did a Gini calculation and other. What are the basic parameters? Gini itself is a parameter, and it's a straightforward calculation if you're familiar with some of the statistical packages. For example, if you're familiar with SPSS, or what we use is Stata, and if you have income series or expenditure series, or the Gini can be calculated for very many other indicators like landholding, education inequality. There are several studies going on. So Gini itself is a parameter. It's calculated. It basically depicts the inequality or level of inequality from a deviation from a line of equality, and its basic origin is Lorentz curve, if you have heard of. So a Lorentz, if you have seen a Lorentz curve, it's basically a triangle where at a right angle, the center line that connects to extreme points of a rectangle is a line of equality, and any deviation from that equality will be captured as inequality. And Gini coefficient is a statistic that is routinely calculated now to look at the inequality level. I don't know if this is what you wanted to hear, but that's the way I would I normally look at what Gini is.
Okay, thank you, sir. Since there is no other question from the participants right now, we can conclude the session here. Thank you so much again for your participation and presence here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Abhijit. Thank you so much.